This is Selena Yvette, host of Stories from Planet Earth. Thanks for listening to the following show on Public House Media.
Throughout history, the course of sports has been shaped by one thing: the fans.
From the moments you never dreamed of,
has saved the USA's life in this World Cup. Paul, the runner, loose ball, it's good. Gonzaga, the flipper still fits.
To the moments that still give you nightmares.
Behind the bag, it gets through Butler. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it. He's in. Patriots win the Super Bowl. Brady has his fifth.
through the good and the bad, fans have helped change the games we watch and the players we love.
They may not be the most logical people.
You are a factory of sadness. I'll see you Sunday.
But they know their teams better than anybody.
They'll blow in the ninth.
You may not always see them, but you know where to find them.
After all, there's nothing quite like the view from the cheap seats.
Broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network.
Grab a chair and enjoy all there is in
The cheap seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome back once again on a Tuesday up into the cheap seats, brought to you by Public House Media. As always, I'm Josh Powers and joined by John Lauder. John, say hello to the people out there.
Hello, everyone. Unlike Deontay Wilder, I had a fantastic weekend.
Yeah, and that guy, and particularly his mentions, are having a little bit of a hard time. But John, I think that's just an example of one of those kinds of moments that is captured in our mind, at least for the moment. And we're going to overuse that word quite a bit. I think that's really kind of going to be our theme for today, John, because, you know, great moments are born from great opportunity. And that's what you have here tonight, boys. That's what you have earned here tonight. One game. If we played them 10 times, they might win 9, but not this game, not tonight. Tonight, we skate with them. Tonight, we shut them down because we can. Tonight, we are the greatest hockey team in the world. You were born to be hockey players, every one of you, and you were meant to be here tonight. This is your time. Their time is done. It's over. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about what a great hockey team the Soviets have. Screw them. This is your time. Now go out there and take it. John, that's one of the greatest speeches I think I've ever heard in my life, regardless of genre. It could be a political speech. It could be a sports speech. That's Herb Brooks, of course, head coach of the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team, riling up the boys in the locker room before, of course, they faced the Soviet Union, what was then known as the Soviet Union, the Russian Army hockey team, which had won something like 20 years worth of gold medals in the Olympics. And here we had this past weekend, the 40th anniversary of what is pretty much undisputed as the greatest sports upset of all time.
Sure.
And I don't know about you. Well, yeah, neither you nor I are really old enough to remember the whole thing. But it changed the culture here in the United States. At least it changed our attitudes. And it's it's one of those things that every time February 22 kind of rolls around, you know, you can't not kind of pay tribute to something like that.
Yeah, it's the greatest moment arguably in U.S. sports history. So it's funny because it's hockey, which is, you know, not our national pastime, not even close. Right. But it was just such a significant moment. It was literally David beating Goliath, and actually it was probably more like, you know, David, if he was, 3 years old, beating Goliath. I mean, it was literally that impossible. And obviously there's been movies and TV shows and documentaries, and Al Michaels has gone on to be one of the greatest announcers we've ever had. And, all of these players are forever looked at as heroes for what they did in that game. And and it's also funny that it wasn't even the gold medal game, but it didn't matter. It was literally the greatest upset we've ever seen. And yeah, it was 8 years before I was even born, but I've heard that speech many times. I've heard Al Michaels' call 100 times. And, it just continues to be one of the most important moments in our sporting culture.
Yeah, one of the cooler things to me, ESPN played the movie Miracle, that was a Disney product, of course, on Sunday night, and they had a tribute with I think it was Mark Johnson, Jim Craig, and Mike Ruzioni. Mike Ruzioni was probably the name to kind of come out of that whole thing, the captain of that team, and he's really made a career as just a motivational speaker from that game, from that Olympics alone. That's a name that people know. And he never really had any kind of a successful hockey career at all. Mark Johnson is actually a great women's hockey coach. And a lot of those guys didn't really go on to be that notable, which is interesting. They had cups of coffee in the NHL here and there. But what Kurt Russell, who plays Herb Brooks in that movie, mentions kind of at the end of it was that very shortly thereafter, the concept of the dream team kind of came up, and we most notably associate the idea of a dream team with the 92 U.S. Basketball team, right?
Yes,
which had Jordan and Barkley, and that's the dream team, right?
That's the greatest team in the history of American sports.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I don't think anybody would really argue with that.
No.
That's one of those.
Yeah, it was basically 11 Hall of Famers and Christian Laettner, who's a collegiate basketball Hall of Famer.
Right, absolutely. And that game, the 1980 victory over the Soviets, set the standard for U.S. hockey, for the National Hockey League to even be a viable thing. And it actually kind of stuns me that there's only about 27% of current NHL players who are American. We have 31 NHL teams, and out of them, we have obviously Canadians, Russians, Swedes, Czechs. It really is kind of that melting pot of America. That victory, that moment, that game made international relations really, really possible, and hockey at least viable as certainly the fourth, but a major U.S. Sport that is worth paying attention to.
Yeah, of course. Let there be no doubt. And again, the fact that it is still this much of an impact 40 years later is a testament to just how much it meant to everyone. And anybody who was alive and old enough at that time to remember knows where they were, when they saw, when they heard, when they listened. And, it's just one of those touchstone moments in people's lives.
Yeah, and we also have a tendency to make the point that nobody actually saw it on television live.
Right.
Like, it wasn't a big deal at the time. I mean, it was a big deal, but the Olympics, I suppose, weren't really a big deal. But that's around here and I guess I'm spoiled a little bit living in Western Pennsylvania because Herb Brooks coached the Pittsburgh Penguins for a while. Craig Patrick, who was the assistant coach on that team, was the Penguins general manager for quite some time. There's a lot of U.S. 1980 links between the Pittsburgh Penguins organization and that team, of course. So it's certainly a special thing for me, at least, and just because I grew up with hockey really being my kind of sport of choice as a boy, watching minor league hockey at the old Toledo Sports Arena, and it hockey more than anything, as I kind of collect my thoughts here, hockey more than anything is one of those sports where you think of the humble nature of it, because you do have to save up a whole lot of money for equipment. It's usually just played by wealthy white kids, which is unfortunate, but that is changing thanks to various NHL programs in a lot of different cities across the country and across Canada as well. So it's a game that really does continue to develop, but there are so many of those just kind of great moments that show up in hockey more so than anywhere else. And just to continue sort of on our theme today, did you happen to see, John, the story of the Zamboni driver who got a win on NHL ice?
Yes, I sure did. Incredible.
So here's a 42-year-old dude who is, I think he's a kidney transplant survivor, right? And he happens to just work for the Toronto Marlies, which is a minor league club in Toronto. So both of the Carolina Hurricanes goaltenders had gone down with injury, and so they pull an emergency backup guy who is available to both teams. He doesn't even work for the Carolina organization, right? He put on a Toronto Marlies helmet to go out there and actually stopped something like 18 shots. He let in 2 goals between the second and the third period. But where else but hockey does something as ridiculous as that happen? And there's a lot of criticism for the NHL being kind of a garage league and being behind the times on a lot of different things, and that's undisputed. But you also get incredible stories like that.
Oh, absolutely. Rarely do you see stories like that in any other sport. You're right. It seems like hockey sort of has the grasp on those types of things. It just seems to happen every now and then that it's just absolutely incredible, and you don't seem to see it anywhere else.
Yep. And this guy, David Ayers, I believe was his name. And I'm pretty sure that was the name of some other famous person, and I'm completely blanking on who it was. But David Ayers, he's going to have an incredible memory for the rest of his life. He was compensated $500 for showing up and getting an NHL victory. That's just hilarious.
Wait, how much did he get?
$500. He gets $500, and he gets to keep his jersey.
Oh, wow, that's all he got? That's terrible. I would have expected he would have gotten more than that.
Right. I mean, I don't know necessarily what the average NHL player makes on a given game day.
Funny that you mentioned that, Josh.
Yeah.
I looked that up because I was curious. I'm like, because I heard a soundbite from him where he's like, I don't care at all about the money. It's not about the money. I'm thinking to myself, I would all be about the money. And
sure.
The minimum wage for hockey is $650,000. So divide that by 82 games. That's about $80,000. Now, if all he got was $500, I wouldn't care about that either. I thought he got $80,000. So I was like, I would certainly care about that, but I guess he did not get that. So.
Yeah. And I mean, what's an authentic jersey cost? $200. So, I mean,
yeah, you got about $700 then.
Right. So good for him, I guess. I mean, and that's a topic for another discussion on a slower sports day. The idea of your own custom jersey. I hate those things. I think they're tacky, but for this particular situation with David Ayers, he gets a pass.
Yes, absolutely.
And John, you opened it up at the beginning of the show, and I think it'll take us into our second segment here. Now that I've gone and shilled about some of the silly, wonderful moments that take place in hockey, whether it's an anniversary or whether it's a guy coming in out of nowhere. We're gonna talk a little bit more about the great moment that happened in a boxing ring as well, coming up in segment number 2. Stick with us.
This is Julianne Condia, host of Rewritten, here on Public House Media. Thank you so much for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Rewritten, where we will talk about you having limitless potential and can rewrite your story at any time. No matter your background, your past, or current situation, you can have the type of life you crave. A new show comes out every single Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Rewritten. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Right back here up in the cheap seats, brought to you once again on a Tuesday by Public House Media. John Lauder, Josh Powers. We want to thank you guys once again for tuning in each and every Tuesday. Certainly leave us a rating or leave us a review on whatever podcast platform that you follow the show on. Definitely take a look at the other offerings from Public House Media as well. Our sports director, Christian Heimel, recently launched the Caught Listening Show in anticipation of baseball season coming up. He's a pro in that, so just to give a little bit of a shill for our bosses. I guess you'd call him our boss. I don't know. Our boss's show. Yeah, why not? He throws in the suggestion every now and then. So yeah, definitely tune in to Public House Media Sports and all of our other offerings as well. Of course, we're available on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as well. Make sure you give us a follow on that side of things. And John, I had made mention of it as we went into the break. We had a big boxing event this past weekend as well. And first off, we talked about great moments to start off the show with hockey and with the Miracle on Ice. And what a great moment we had just to observe the names of the heavyweight fighters on the card vying for the championship this past weekend. Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury. I don't know if there's
great
two
names.
I don't know if there's two better names in all of sports right now, other than those. And it's an unusual situation that we had because you don't really hear about heavyweight boxing anymore. And one of the things that you and I sort of went over in planning for this show was, what does it take for fringe sports like hockey, like NASCAR, and like boxing to get the attention of the public eye? And you really do need these big time events to draw attention away from football, basketball, baseball.
Yeah, well, look, let's be honest. NASCAR, if Ryan Newman doesn't get into that horrific crash, the Daytona 500 is ho-hum, and that's the biggest race in NASCAR.
True.
I'm not saying there aren't a ton of NASCAR fans. There certainly are, but
absolutely
in the sports hierarchy, that's pretty far down. But it
number
was
5 or 6 probably.
Yeah, but it was international news because we thought Ryan Newman had died, and thankfully he did not. But that just shows you right there what is needed for NASCAR to be at the top of the sports discussion.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think there's a certain segment of fans that watch hockey for fighting and that watch NASCAR for crashes. And it's interesting with boxing because the whole point of the sport is to give your opponent a concussion.
Right.
And here we had Tyson Fury come out and win. So I meant to look it up. Tyson Fury going into the fight with Deontay Wilder was considered the lineal heavyweight world champion. And I don't even know what lineal means. And I'm thinking that there's a segment of our fan base out there that doesn't know what that really means either.
No, I certainly don't.
Right. So just according to Wikipedia, a lineal championship is where a champion is decided in a particular weight class by titles held initially by an undisputed champion and subsequently by a fighter who defeats the reigning champion in a match at that weight class. In professional boxing, the lineal championship is informally called the man who beat the man. So it's just, it's meaningless.
God, boxing is such a train wreck. Really? Oh, Lord. This is why I don't watch boxing.
Right. It really is. And it's interesting because there are so many different governing bodies that surround boxing. And that was where Fury kind of where the Fury victory is a big deal because Wilder had held one of those other governing bodies titles. And, whenever it comes down to a big event, it's the heavyweights, and then you have your names in the lightweight division, right? We talk about Mayweather, we talk about Pacquiao. When the Olympics come around, that's kind of a big deal, of course. But I don't know, when I was a little guy, and maybe it's because I also watched a lot of pro wrestling coming up, I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world to see some of the pageantry and to hear Michael Buffer or whoever it is announce you as the heavyweight champion of the world.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Well, his voice is incredible.
Yeah, it's just a cool line. Or, the Rocky movies, right? Same kind of thing.
Yes.
There's just something great about where boxing kind of fits into our culture. But yeah, it just as you mentioned, it is a total mess. And I don't know, do you think that that Wilder and Fury changes that at all?
No. It was certainly a big deal. There's going to be a third one of these, as there seems to be now. And then they're saying that Fury will likely fight Anthony Joshua as well. Apparently he's going to do 2 or 3 more fights and then retire. Boxing will never be what it once was, ever. It's just not going to happen. But look, it was also the biggest gross in Las Vegas history. So it's not like they're not making money. So as long as they continue to make money for these big fights, that's what people are going to care about. But for me, the only thing I really care about that happens in a ring is celebrity deathmatch.
Oh, bring it on. Absolutely. I can't wait for more and more claymation. And I mean, those are really our dream matches, right? I mean,
yes.
that was fantastic stuff.
Oh, the best.
And I think that boxing and really any Vegas event is significant because we start to be open about the gambling aspect of it.
Yes, of course, for sure.
And that's really where you make or lose a ton of money, right? Like that's the purse. That's where the biggest thing comes from. And it's because it is primarily like a Las Vegas based thing. And
yes.
That was why the NFL and the NHL and every other major sport tended to avoid Las Vegas for a while. And now thankfully the pall is starting to come down.
Yeah, for sure. And sports gambling online is huge. Tons of people do it. And it's going to become legal in more and more states. So it's just going to continue to get bigger and bigger.
Right. And I was having a conversation with a guy in the car earlier today because more and more starts to come out about the Houston Astros thing, right? And
yes.
There was a reporter that came out and said that maybe Rob Manfred was tipped off to it a couple of years ago. And that means one of two things. Either Manfred didn't think that there was anything wrong, or he knew about it and he covered it up for 2 years. And if that's the case, then Rob Manfred needs to resign tomorrow.
Sure.
And it got me just, and this is a little bit of a conspiracy theorist in me. It got me to thinking, what is the single biggest sin that you can commit in baseball? It's gambling, right? Like sure. That's why Pete Rose is not in the Hall of Fame. That's why the White Sox scandal got every one of those guys banned. What if, just what if, Manfred or any member of the Houston Astros organization or the Red Sox organization or any of these other clubs, what if they were just doing it for the sake of gambling interests? Like that blows it up on an entirely different level, doesn't it?
It does. I find that unlikely, but that would be something.
Yeah, so let's hope that doesn't come out. I mean, there's something when we talk about big events, great moments, you can't help but frame them against some of the more terrible things as well. And I think that, John, what I learned today really is that great moments emerge in sports out of significant adversity, whether it's trying to bring your sport back to some kind of level of prominence. And again, boxing, horse racing, those were like the big sports before, the money came into things, and the money was always there. And, maybe that's why they were the biggest things at the time. And so whether it's heavyweight boxing or MMA is kind of taking its place, or whether it's hockey, whether it's NASCAR, whatever those big events are, framing the triumph that comes out of some of the misery, I guess, around them, that's what makes them great. John, what'd you learn today?
I learned that ESPN will do anything to make sure that all of their properties are seen as much as possible, being that they took full advantage of the 40th anniversary this weekend by showing their movie and all that other stuff. Nobody, for lack of a better term, pimps themselves better than ESPN.
So very, very true. Hulu's getting in on it a little bit.
That's true.
But you know what? That's just the changing dynamic of how we consume
Absolutely.
sports. And you know what? We'll see what happens going forward. We want to thank each and every one of you out there for listening this week, last week, and all weeks going forward. And we will see you in the future.